Quality, comfort, and grip at an affordable price. Whether it's our standard, pro, or elite socks, there's an option for everyone. Try a pair for yourself now at puregripsocks.com.
The New Balance Tekela V4 Plus Pro Low or the Nike Phantom GX2 Elites? Which is the better control boot? Where we all know the GX2 is a great pair of football boots, but there's also plenty of people that are of the opinion that Nike boots aren't quite what they used to be, where if we follow back the Nike Phantom lineage, you're eventually going to end up on the 2014 Nike Magista Obra, to many people, the holy grail of knitted Nike football boots. And if we were to compare these to something that is currently available, the closest comparison would be the Tekela from New Balance. And really quickly, before we get started, if you enjoy the comparison videos on the channel, don't forget to drop a like on this video and make sure you're subscribed if you haven't already so you don't miss out on my reviews of all the latest football boots of 2024. Starting off with pricing and the options that you have within each of these two lines, where the Nike Phantom GX2 Elite retails for $260, pretty well the same as what you're going to find from most top-end models these days. However, you do have the option of a mid-cut Luna 2 Elite, which is the exact same boot with a collar, that'll run you $285. With the Tekela V4 Plus Pro Low being significantly less expensive than the Nike alternative at $215, with there also being a mid-cut option on offer for the same $215. However, that specifically is a laceless football boot, which may or may not be your thing. Meaning that the Tekela at full retail is $45 less expensive than the GX. However, given that these aren't the most popular football boots, you can regularly find older colorways pretty deeply discounted, where you can get a pair of Tekelas for sometimes over $100 less than a pair of GX2s. However, like I always say in my videos, you don't have to pay full retail. If you're interested in either of these boots, you can pick them up below their normal retail prices by way of some exclusive SR4U coupon codes by checking out the links down below. When it comes to touch on the ball, both of these boots feature some variation of a knitted upper. For the Nikes, it's grip knit. For the Tekelas, it's what they call their hypo knit material. And if we're comparing this again to that OG Magista Obra, this comes very close in terms of overall thickness. It's obviously very flexible and sock-like, arguably more so than the Magistas were, and you are going to find some micro texturing on the surface in a couple different ways, little lines on the lateral and medial side of the midfoot, and then more of just the knitted texture itself across the top of the toes. It also has that little bit of sponginess to the inside liner, which really does give it that kind of softer sock-like feel in terms of touch on the ball, where the grip knit of the Phantom GX2 is still super pliable and definitely very sock-like, but a little bit thinner and a little bit firmer to the feel against your foot, meaning that the touch on the ball is also slightly thinner than what the Tekela has. With the bigger, more meaningful difference between these two uppers being the amount of grip on the ball that each of them provides, where the GX2, its flagship feature is definitely the grip knit material in the sense that the surface is actually grippy across the entire foot, which legitimately does give you that additional grip that makes for a sensation of control, but at the same time does take some getting used to and is, at the end of the day, very much a personal preference thing. The grip itself is noticeable without being overly sticky, so it's not necessarily going to provide the same bite against the ball as something like an aggressive rubber element would, but the fact that you get this soft grip so consistently across the entire upper, especially with the laces being pushed to the lateral side, is just a really nice sensation. There's no doubt about that, where if you're a fan of having additional grip on the ball for whatever reason, I'm not sure that there's a better upper than this one right here. Where the Tekela, like I mentioned earlier, is a lot more like the OG Magista Obra in that it is a knitted upper, but it's covered in a top layer of polyurethane, basically the same thing as what Nike skin would be, meaning that the touch is not slippery, but certainly doesn't have the stickiness that you'll get from the grip knit of the GX. Also kind of like an opposite feature of the GX, but also very similar to the Magista series. The laces are actually pushed to the medial side, so you get a little bit of a difference in terms of how the upper wraps your foot and a little bit of a cleaner striking surface or touch area on the lateral side rather than the medial side. So again, at the end of the day, it's very much a personal preference thing, where if you like less grip, you'll probably prefer the Tekelas, whereas if you prefer more grip, you're definitely going to like the GX2. When it comes to sole plates and stud patterns, there is once again a pretty significant difference between these two, where the sole plates themselves, I would say, differentiate in the sense that the GX2 feels more speed boot-esque in terms of its base shaping, as well as just generally being a little bit on the firmer side versus the more traditional kind of flexible feel of the Tekela sole plate. Not that it feels flimsy, but certainly if you want that little bit of a firmer sensation underfoot, you get more of that from the FG sole plate of the Phantom GX2. But the stud patterns, I think, is really where there's going to be some major separation, in the sense that the Tekelas feature a very unique setup in that the main studs in the forefoot are conical studs. The same thing goes for what's under the heel. They kind of have a little bit of a square shape, but feel like conical studs underfoot. But you can see running along the edges, you kind of have these half-length bladed studs for the sake of providing that little bit of extra grip when on the edges of your feet, which when you really think about how you move in a pair of football boots, it makes a lot of sense to put grip, or at least studs, as close to the edge as possible, because when you are making those changes of direction, your feet are never completely flat on the ground. So that as a feature, while it may or may not actually make that big of a difference, the peace of mind of having that extra grip so close to the edges, I think, is a meaningful feature. With the traction on offer, I think actually being really solid, in that the conical studs still allow for that freedom to twist and pivot, but when you are making those quick changes of direction, it really does feel like you're getting all the bite you could possibly want. Where the FG stud pattern of the GX2 has not been as well received, it's a carryover directly from the original Phantom Luna, which was also not the most popular football boot, where the main feature here is this Cyclone 360 setup of 5 bladed studs that, according to Nike, prioritizes rotational movements. But as we know, bladed studs, which you have all the way through this stud pattern, do not really allow your foot to twist and pivot when planted, meaning that this is a more aggressive stud pattern, again, kind of falling more so into the speed boot category in terms of how it feels and performs, where if you like aggressive traction, I actually think this is really, really good. But if you don't want that speed boot feel from what is ultimately marketed as a control boot, not that that really means all that much, this is probably not the stud pattern that you're looking for, again, unless you just want something super aggressive. What is nice about the GX2 though is you also have the option of going for the AG Pro stud pattern, which also changes the sole plate up to what you got on the original Phantom GX, making it a little bit more flexible and again, more similar to that of the Tekela, but it swaps out those bladed studs for conical studs that do have the hollowed out center, which is a signature of Nike's AG Pro layouts, which means that it's not only well suited for use on artificial grass, but you notice that the stud length is pretty normal, and this is very much a stud pattern that you could get away with using on firm natural grass as well. The end result being that the more traditional stud pattern with rounded studs ends up feeling and performing in a more traditional way, giving you that freedom to twist and pivot if that's your preference. When it comes to weight, I think both of these boots are actually a lot lighter than what a lot of people would expect, given that they do fall into the control category. But as far as what the difference is between them, the scale does not lie. Both in the same size 9.5 US. We'll start off with the Tekelas, and you can see that they weigh in at 7.05 ounces, the equivalent of 200 grams exactly. Remember those numbers. Change the scale back to ounces, and we'll throw on the GX2 Elite, and you can see that they weigh in at 6.9 ounces, the equivalent of 195 grams. Meaning that the Nikes are technically 5 grams lighter, but in terms of the weight that you can actually feel on your feet, they are pretty well identical. When it comes to fit and overall comfort, you're definitely going to notice some similarities between these two. Because the uppers are both knitted and very similar in overall thickness, they both have that kind of sock-like sensation. Yes, the upper of the Tekela has that little bit of extra padding that the GXs don't have, but at the end of the day, in terms of the feel on feet, there's not a huge difference that you can tell between them. The bigger change, I would say, is more so in the shaping of these two boots, where at the end of the day, they are also quite similar and both relate pretty closely to the shape of that OG Magista Obra, in that they have decent width through the midfoot and forefoot and then taper a little bit as you get through the toe box area. But the Tekela is a little bit tighter through the heel than what you're going to find from the GX, which has a little bit of a wider, more open, less structured shaping and construction to it, which personally, I do find that a little bit more comfortable. As far as width is concerned, they both have decent width to them as long as you don't mind that tapered fit through the toes. However, with the New Balance, you do have the option of the regular fit variation that I'm currently wearing, as well as wide fit options, which is something that is pretty much exclusive to the New Balance brand at this point, where if you do need that extra width, it is something that is an option to you, which is really nice. I wish more brands would implement the same ideology. As far as sizing is concerned, both do run true to size. I'm wearing both of these boots in my usual size 9.5 US, and the fit and the length is pretty well perfect. The GXs in comparison maybe run that little bit longer, but not enough to where I would justify personally going down in size. But at the end of the day, in terms of fit and feel on feet, there really isn't that much that separates these two. So in conclusion, which is the better control boot, the GX2 or the Tekela? And of course, personal preference is going to be a gigantic factor, as it always is, in terms of determining which one is going to be best for you. But based on my own experience and preferences, which one of these boots feels like it gives me the best control, I would definitely say it's the GX2, and that's for one reason and one reason only: the Nike Grip Upper. They've struck a really nice balance of having extra grip, which gives you that sensation of control without the upper feeling like it's too sticky, where when it comes to receiving a pass or juggling a ball or even when shooting, there just seems to be the perfect amount of grip where you just get this sensation of control that I honestly can't say that I get from any other football boot. Also, the fact that it's incorporated into the upper without any elements bolted on top, like a normal rubber striking grip element would typically have, just makes for a super close touch on the ball with, again, that controlled sensation that only the extra grip can provide. Having said that, if you don't like having a ton of extra grip on the ball, which is a lot of people, I think the New Balance Tekela is a phenomenal option, especially if the Nike Magista Obra with its Flyknit upper and Nike skin covering is an all-time favorite for you. This really does feel in a lot of ways like a reincarnation of that football boot, down to the positioning of the lacing system, the texture on the surface, the thickness of the upper. It's very close to what the Magistas would have been, but also less expensive, lighter, low cut, which is something that I think a lot of people wanted, with what I would argue is a better stud pattern as well. Both are phenomenal examples of knitted upper football boots. It's just a matter of whether you want more grip or less.